Staples and traditions in video games are generally a good thing, I would say. They help build familiarity, even when playing new games, give fans something to get excited for or rally behind, and they help developers set their game apart from the rest by making sure these tropes become associated with their franchise and their franchise only. And that has been what makes archetypes in the way Fire Emblem has them so interesting to me. Because in a way, yeah, they're super recognizable and we could probably all easily name a couple right now. But at the same time, many also have quite the limited availability or were much more pronounced in the olden days, to the point newer fans might not even realize Fire Emblem has its starter Pokemon like staples. Today, I want to go past some archetypes as the series has seen them over the decades, ranging from the super common and ever-present to the one you might not even realize are actually recurring tropes. But we start with what I would consider the most recognizable trope in the series, the one I can't imagine you're not familiar with. The older, veteran knight who joins early as a pre-promote with good to great stats in the early game, but generally falls off as the game progresses. Or Jagen for short, named after the grandfather of the trope from the original Shadow Dragon. Although, if I may go on a little tangent before we have even established the main path, one minor irk of mine has always been how these tropes are usually named after the first character to fit them, meaning that in practice, like half the Shadow Dragon cast has one. It always felt a little odd to me, especially when you consider that for several tropes, an Arcania character may have been the first, but they weren't necessarily the best example of it. Plus, using a character's name can make it kinda hard to tell what kind of qualities actually define an archetype. Jagen doesn't mean anything to someone who has never played Shadow Dragon, but if the term was say Veteran Paladin, suddenly every brand new Engage player knows you mean Vander. Anyway, back to the trope itself. So yeah, it is borderline impossible to have played a Fire Emblem game that didn't have such a character in it. Well, the best-selling game in the franchise doesn't have one, so that isn't true, and neither does Gaiden or Shadows of Valentia, but beyond those, every game has had this trope featured. Although it does also have some differences here and there that has caused some fans to kinda split up the Jagens into two camps. One consists of the pure Jagens, elderly men who are days away from retirement, like the original Jagen, Gunther or Binding Blade's Marcus. The other is named after Oife, from Genealogy of the Holy War, and consists of characters that function the same in-game, but are significantly younger, like the titular character, Seth, Titania and Frederick. Also noteworthy is that these tend to drop off way less harshly than their older counterparts. But I don't know, even if they aren't all technically the same thing, I don't consider Jagens to be two separate categories. After all, it has never been stated that in order to be considered part of this trope, you have to be old, and you have to be a man, and you have to fall off. That's something we as fans created, that's not an actual thing. Nothing about these archetypes is set in stone, and that's what I like about them actually. No trope shows this better than what the fans have come to call the Christmas calves, based on Cain and Abel from, again, Shadow Dragon. A red and green unit that usually come in pairs, and as the name suggests, usually are cavaliers. But not always. This trope is easily the most prevalent we have ever seen, with every single game featuring it, from Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light all the way to Engage, without a single absence. And I would definitely say that part of the reason why this trope has stood the test of time better than any other is because of how diverse it has been. As early as the second game in the series, Gaiden, this trope would diverge from its cavalier origins, with May and Bowie being the green and red pair of Valentia. And funnily enough, when the entire cast later received redesigns for the 3DS remake, they were actually relieved from their duties and replaced by Lucas and Forsyth. Following Gaiden though, the trope would remain cavalier only for decades. From Mystery of the Emblem with Luke and Roderick, all the way to Awakening with Sully and Stahl, every green and red pair would ride a horse. But then, this changed. Fates may have made some mistakes in the character department here and there, it's fair to say, but their usage of this trope is in my opinion unparalleled and one of the coolest in the entire series. Kaze and Saizo fit the trope here. Two ninja brothers that are not only really cool, but also much more story relevant than any prior Christmas calves, with especially Kaze of course playing a dubious role in the plot of Birthright. And ever since Fates changed what this archetype actually looked like, we haven't looked back. The aforementioned Lucas and Forsyth don't ride a horse, Shamir and Catherine, easily the most subtle of the group, don't either, and Clan and Fram follow in line with what it now means to be a Christmas calf. a close pair of green and red units. The Cavalier part has been completely dropped, and I honestly love that. It has made this one of my favorite tropes. I'm already curious how the next game will implement it, and I hope other tropes follow this example going forward. Speaking of which, one classic trope that has been MIA for more than a decade now and could really use a fresh coat of paint is the Pegasus Sisters. Once upon a time, this was arguably one of Fire Emblem's most recognizable archetypes, although I am talking like very far back. It was so recognizable that Pala, Katria and Est made the jump from Shadow Dragon to Gaiden like it was nothing. And that, let's call them what they are, copycats emerged in several games in a row. Genealogy has two enemy trios, Freyja skipped out, but on the GBA we got Juno, Fia and Shanna, Fiora, Farina and Florina, and Cyrene, Vanessa and Tana. The latter already begins to deviate from the trend a little, by including an important plot-relevant character into the trio in the form of Tana, something we would also see when it returned for the last time in Tellius. Alincia, Tanith and Marcia are definitely the least connected example of this trope we have ever seen, even if they're not strangers, obviously. But ever since Awakening, this archetype has effectively disappeared, remakes notwithstanding, and while you could chalk that up to the introduction of freely switching classes, I'm not sure if that is entirely correct. After all units still join you with a canon class, so to speak, one that is usually very ingrained with their personality. Yeah, you can make Churchy anything you want, but she remains very much coded to be a Wyvern Knight. Even a game like Free Houses, which makes spotting these tropes even more difficult thanks to the way it shoves all characters into the Academy mold at first, has characters like Felix or Raphael, clearly meant to be a Swordmaster and Brawler respectively, even if you're not forced to make them that. Through that lens, you could make the argument that Awakening actually does have this trope, you just never get to use it to its full force. Sumia, Cordelia and Phila, with the latter obviously not playable. I would still say that this would be a very light use of the trope, but it would prolong its history with another entry at least. I have to say though, I was fully expecting Engage to bring this archetype back, seeing as how it was clearly meant to be a celebration title and more of a linear, straightforward experience compared to Fates and Free Houses. But no, unlike Awakening, Engage doesn't even come remotely close. So yeah, it does appear like this trope is well and truly dead in the ditch, and might never be seen again. And while I wouldn't go that far for our next archetype, this one too has definitely seen better days. The Camus archetype is to this day one I see people discuss quite often, perhaps because it is an easy to recognize one, or maybe people just really like it. On the surface, it does also feel quite easy to implement. All you need is an enemy general who doesn't really feel like a bad person per se, but does remain loyal to their evil king or emperor or general, despite knowing they're probably on the wrong side of history. I would say Camus is more than just that, but that is the trope as it has come to exist over the years, and we have seen it time and time again. And that makes sense. This is a tried and true idea that is super popular in not just Fire Emblem, but a whole lot of series in the RPG genre and with Fire Emblem's themes. And yet, despite all that, it has kinda gone the way of the Pegasus Sisters. It was very prevalent in the first half of the series with Eldegon, Reinhardt, Gaul, Lloyd and Linus, Selena, Shiharam, and there are even more. But once again, this kinda died out with Awakening. All major bosses and villains from here on out are either fully on board with their evil leaders, not having an ounce of sympathy for your cause, others are too minor and only appear in one chapter that kinda disqualifies them, like Mustafa, or they're recruitable. Sometimes directly, like Mauvir, sometimes later down the line, like Yenfei, and sometimes in a different timeline, like Xander, who's kind of a Camus in Birthright, or plenty of students in Free Houses. But an actual full-on story-relevant enemy commander who respects you but never betrays their leader, that's something we haven't seen for a decade plus. Now, these four I really wanted to highlight for how well known they are. But really, there are so many archetypes in Fire Emblem, you can spend an entire year talking about them all. Evil cults, creepy mages, 1000-year-old dragons that look like kids, dragons that are actual dragons and fought in the last second of the game, kids that are actual kids yet still thrown onto the battlefield, evil seductresses, edgy swordmasters, buff but dumb warriors, dead parental figures, do I need to go on? There are so many of these that are legit and it makes you wonder why we, as a fanbase, apparently find the need to create even more. Take the Julians, for example. Not including the originator, this group is like 3 characters strong, so barely a recurring trope to begin with, and the only thing that ties them together is being thieves with honor. I don't know, man, that's too flimsy for my taste. Thief is just a class, so thieves joining you can barely be considered noteworthy. And since we play as the good guys, they have to have some redeeming qualities to them as well. So while they are all honorable, like 90% of the units we can use in general are as well. That's like calling a Wyvern Knight with hair a trope, which is apparently borderline a thing already when you ask people who consider the Minerva to be an archetype. Sure, I'll give you Altena, Melody, and I guess Jill if you really squint your eyes, cause they at the very least wear red, even if beyond that they don't share much with Minerva really, but alright. Roping in Churchy and Vida is a bridge too far for me, and I've even seen Har, Cormac, Ivy and Camilla included, which just makes the trope a class. That's like including Fur and Guy with the actual Navars, even though the only thing they have in common is their class. It's getting out of hand. Maybe it's just human nature to always want to see patterns and group things together, but I don't know, I think this is all a bridge too far. Young female mages like Linde are not a trope. Every game has mages, for gameplay reasons. Roughly 50% of all our units are women, I would imagine, and nearly everyone is young. The fact that sometimes those 3 overlap is not noteworthy and not an archetype. But I don't want to end on that sour note. I have one more trope in the stash that is among my favorites, and not because I necessarily like it so much, but because I admire how wild yet also deliberate and intentional it is. Like many of these tropes, you can definitely ask how deliberately IS set out to create them. Many aren't really even Fire Emblem tropes per se, they're just RPG or anime tropes instead. But this one is as random and intentional as they come. It's a relatively new one too. First appearing in The Binding Blade are a duo of Bandit Brothers that look like they walked right out of your favorite anime's filler episode. They have vibrant hair colors, look nearly identical, have odd personalities to say the least, and the strangest names a localization team could come up with, especially since they often go for feminine names. Like in The Binding Blade, where you have Maggie and Rose. The Blazing Blade also has Jasmine, but does also introduce a Paul, which was the last time the brothers didn't have paired names. Radiant Dawn has the amazing Pain and Agony, and actually makes them Lagoose as well, which is unique to say the least. And then there's also Vincent and Victor from Awakening, Lloyd and Lewin from Fates, and Techi and Tochi from Engage, making this a rare archetype that has actually become more pronounced as the years have gone by. They missed out on 3 houses, possibly due to someone at Intelligent Systems finding it hilarious while the folks at Koei Tecmo didn't get the joke, but they've been surprisingly ever present aside from that. It has ironically come to the point that this bizarre archetype feels like one of the biggest shoo-ins to also make it into the next title. That feels kinda insane when you think about it, right? Anyway, that's just my compact thoughts about this huge side of the Fire Emblem series, but what are yours? What's your favorite archetype and which ones do you dislike? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.